Here's the standardized, optimized, and seamless script text, ready for high-end AI voiceover generation. All structural markers have been removed, and the flow has been polished for a cinematic listening experience. January 26th, 1945. The woods outside Holtzwihr, France. The temperature is 14 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the flat Alsatian fields into a sheet of iron-hard ice. At the edge of the tree line, an American M10 Tank Destroyer burns violently, its hull glowing red as ammunition cooks off in sporadic, lethal pops. By all tactical logic, this is a strictly prohibited kill zone. Every surviving American soldier has fled into the forest, except one. Perched atop the burning turret, silhouetted against the flames and the grey winter sky, is a 19-year-old lieutenant. He is alone, shivering from a bout of malaria, and manning an exposed .50 caliber machine gun. Facing him across the open snow are 6 German tanks and over 200 infantrymen, moving in for the kill. The vehicle beneath him is a ticking time bomb, loaded with high-octane fuel and explosives. Yet, for 1 hour, he does not move. This is the moment Audie Murphy becomes a legend. But the road to this frozen field began months earlier, in a strategic nightmare known as the Colmar Pocket. To understand the isolation of that burning tank destroyer, we must first look away from the famous hedgerows of Normandy and the frozen forests of Bastogne, turning our eyes to a neglected, festering wound in the Allied line. By January 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing, but it was not dead. While the world's attention was fixed on the massive drama of the Battle of the Bulge to the north, a different, equally brutal crisis was unfolding in the south, in the Alsace region of France. Here, the German 19th Army had defied the Allied advance. They had not retreated across the Rhine into Germany as expected. Instead, they had dug their heels into a massive semicircular bridgehead on the west bank of the river, centered around the city of Colmar. This was the Colmar Pocket, a stubborn bulge of Nazi-occupied territory, 30 miles wide and 40 miles deep. It was a strategic dagger pointed at the flank of the Allied armies. As long as the Germans held this ground, they controlled key bridges across the Rhine, allowing them to funnel supplies and reinforcements into France while threatening to sever the Allied lines stretching toward Germany. The terrain here was not the dense, defensible forest of the Ardennes, but the broad, flat Rhine plain. It was a landscape of open fields, small farming villages, and isolated patches of woods. Territory that offered almost no natural cover for an attacking force. In the summer, it was picturesque farmland. In the winter of 1945, it was a killing floor. And what a winter it was. The season of 1944 to 45 remains recorded as one of the coldest in 20th century European history. The ground was frozen solid to a depth of several feet. Entrenching tools bounced off the earth as if striking concrete. Soldiers could not dig in. They could only scrape shallow depressions or pile logs and snow for meager protection. The wind screamed down the Rhine Valley, dropping temperatures well below zero, freezing machinery, jamming weapons, and turning frostbite into a casualty producer as efficient as shrapnel. For the Allied High Command, the Colmar Pocket was a source of intense frustration. General Dwight D. Eisenhower had ordered the pocket destroyed before the main invasion of Germany could proceed. The logic was cold and simple. You cannot invade the enemy's homeland while leaving a heavily armed force of 50,000 enemy troops in your rear. But the Germans, fighting with their backs to the river and their homeland just across the water, fought with the fanatical desperation of men with nowhere left to run. They fortified every village, mined every road, and turned the flat, icy plains into registered artillery zones. The task of reducing this frozen fortress fell to the U.S. 6th Army Group, and specifically to units like the 3rd Infantry Division. But by late January, the Allied offensive was faltering. The weather had grounded air support. The supply lines were stretched thin by the massive consumption of the Battle of the Bulge. The men on the line were not fresh recruits. They were exhausted veterans who had been fighting almost non-stop since landing in southern France the previous August. The strategic situation in late January was grim. On January 20th, the French First Army launched an attack in the south of the Pocket, but was bogged down by a blinding snowstorm. To the north, the U.S. forces were ordered to crack the German defensive shell. The objective was to drive toward the Rhine and cut the German supply lines at the Neuf-Brisach bridge. But to get there, they had to cross the Ill River and clear the Riedwehr woods, a small forest belt that the Germans had turned into a fortress of machine gun nests and tank ambushes. It was into this meat grinder that the 15th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Division was thrown. The Rock of the Marne Division had a legendary reputation, dating back to the First World War. But reputations do not stop bullets. By the time they reached the frozen fields outside the village of Holtzwihr, the division was bleeding. Regiments were operating at battalion strength. Companies were whittled down to the size of platoons. The intricate machine of the American military was beginning to grind its gears against the sheer physical misery of the Alsatian winter. The stage was set for a disaster. The Germans sensed the Allied weakness. They massed their armor, heavy Jagdpanthers and mobile tank destroyers, hidden in the gloom of the Holtzwihr woods, waiting for the Americans to step out onto the open ice. The trap was laid. All that was missing was the prey. The fatigue of the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division in January 1945 was not merely physical. It was a bone-deep exhaustion of the soul. These men were the workhorses of the European theater. Many of the officers and NCOs were gone, killed in Italy, wounded in the Dragoon landings, or evacuated with severe trench foot in the Vosges Mountains. The unit that approached Holtzwihr was a skeleton crew held together by pride and the sheer habit of survival. Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment was the tip of this blunted spear. On paper, an infantry company is a robust force of nearly 200 riflemen, supported by mortar teams and machine gun squads. By the time Company B reached the edge of the Riedwehr woods on January 25th, it had ceased to be a company in anything but name. Casualties and illness had ravaged the roster. When roll was called in the freezing darkness, only 18 enlisted men and 1 officer remained. That officer was First Lieutenant Audie Murphy. The tactical situation facing this decimated unit was a textbook nightmare. Their objective was to hold a small hook-shaped projection of forest known as the Bois de Riedwehr. This patch of trees was the only cover in miles of open terrain. To the south lay the village of Holtzwihr, a German stronghold teeming with armor. Between the woods and the village lay 600 yards of flat, snow-covered ground, a killing zone with zero cover. If the Germans wanted to push the Americans back, they had to take these woods. If the Americans wanted to advance, they had to hold them. On the afternoon of January 25th, Murphy moved his 19 men to the very edge of the tree line. They could not dig in. The earth was a slab of granite-hard ice. Instead, They scavenged for shallow ruts and covered themselves with brush, trying to become invisible against the grey landscape. They were dangerously exposed, hanging off the end of the Allied line like a loose thread waiting to be cut. Recognizing the desperate vulnerability of Murphy's position, battalion headquarters sent reinforcements, but in the logistical case of the Colmar Pocket, reinforcements was a relative term. 3 M10 Tank Destroyers from the 600 1st Tank Destroyer Battalion rumbled into the woods. These were open-topped vehicles, essentially heavy cannons mounted on tank chassis, designed to hunt armor from ambush, not to stand toe-to-toe with German heavy tanks in a slugging match. Along with them came 2 companies of the 1st Battalion, but these were not seasoned veterans. They were largely composed of green replacements, fresh from the States, men who had never heard a shot, fired in anger, and had no idea how to survive in the merciless cold of the Alsace. As night fell on January 25th, the temperature plummeted further. Murphy ordered his men to stay awake. Sleep meant freezing to death. The silence in the Riedwehr woods was heavy, broken only by the crack of freezing branches and the distant rumble of engines from Holtzwihr. The Germans were moving. Murphy knew what was coming. The enemy doctrine was predictable. A counterattack at dawn to wipe out the bridgehead before the Americans could consolidate. He positioned his 3 M10s to cover the open field, set up his field telephone in a forward foxhole, and waited. His company, 19 men against an expected regiment, was effectively a speed bump. They were bait, placed at the edge of the woods to force the enemy to reveal their hand. The dawn of January 26th brought no sun, only a lightening of the grey gloom. The air was still. The men of Company B, shivering in their thin coats, peered into the mist obscuring Holtzwihr. Then the ground began to tremble. It wasn't the wind. It was the synchronized idle of Maybach engines. The hammer was about to fall, and the only thing standing in its way was a 19-year-old Texan and a broken company that had forgotten how to run. To fully grasp the absurdity of the confrontation at Holtzwihr, we must analyze the 2 opposing forces. This was not a meeting of equals. It was a collision between a desperate, depleted giant and a solitary, razor-sharp edge. If you were to cast a hero for a war movie in 1945, you would never choose Audie Murphy. Standing 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing barely 110 pounds, Murphy looked more like a runner for the high school track team than an infantry company commander. His face was smooth, almost cherubic, earning him the nickname Babyface among the older men. He had been rejected by the Marines and the paratroopers for being too small. The army had only taken him as a last resort. But appearances on the battlefield are a dangerous deception. By January 1945, this small Texan was arguably the most lethal combat soldier in the European theater. He was a product of the Great Depression, raised in crushing poverty, where he hunted rabbits to feed his siblings. In Texas, he learned that bullets cost money, so you didn't miss. He brought that terrifying economy of violence to the war. By the time he reached the Colmar Pocket, Murphy was a Mustang, an officer promoted from the ranks due to sheer battlefield competence. He possessed a tactical intuition that bordered on precognition. He knew where the enemy would hide. He knew when they would attack. And most importantly, he understood the psychology of fear. But on this specific morning, Murphy was a wreck. He was suffering from a recurring bout of malaria contracted in Italy. His body was racked with fever, His joints ached, and an open wound in his hip from a sniper's bullet months earlier was gangrenous and leaking. He was physically deteriorating, operating on a reserve of nervous energy that should have run dry weeks ago. Yet, as the German engines revved up in Holtzwihr, it was Murphy who walked the line, checking weapons, steadying the nerves of the terrified replacements. He was the only thing holding the line together, a steel wire inside a fraying rope. Facing Murphy was a force designed to crush exactly this kind of light resistance. The German units in the Colmar Pocket were a mix of hardened veterans and desperate defenders. Specifically, the attack on Holtzwihr was spearheaded by elements of the 2nd Mountain Division and heavy armor support. These were not the ragtag Volkssturm conscripts often seen in late war footage. These were cold weather specialists, men who knew how to fight in snow and ice. Crucially, they possessed the technological upper hand. The German assault force included Jagdpanthers, heavy tank destroyers built on the Panther tank chassis. The Jagdpanther was a predator. It mounted the dreaded 88mm gun, capable of knocking out any Allied vehicle from 2 kilometers away. Its sloping frontal armor was virtually impervious to the 76mm guns of the American tank destroyers. The German commanders knew the American weakness. They knew the 3rd Division was exhausted. They knew the M10 supporting the infantry were open-topped, thinly armored, and vulnerable to artillery airbursts. Their plan was sound. Use the heavy armor to smash the American vehicles from long range, then unleash the infantry, clad in winter white camouflage, to sweep the terrified survivors from the woods. It was a hammer blow aimed at a pane of glass. This mismatch in morale and machinery is critical. The Germans were fighting with the desperate energy of men defending their own border. The Americans were freezing, sick, and demoralized. When the attack began, the psychological weight of the German armor terrified the green American replacements. The sheer mechanical terror of a tiger or Jagdpanther grinding through the snow cannot be overstated. It is a noise that vibrates in the chest. Against this industrial monster, Murphy had only his carbine and a field telephone. The math was impossible. To understand why Murphy's stand was so suicidal, you have to look at the machine he climbed onto. The M10 Wolverine was not a tank. It was a tank destroyer. In American military doctrine, tanks were for supporting infantry, while tank destroyers were fast, lightly armored hunters designed to ambush enemy armor and then speed away. They were not built to hold ground. The M10 had a fatal flaw for the conditions in Holtzwihr. It had an open turret. There was no roof. The crew was exposed to the elements, to snipers, and most terrifyingly, to artillery airbursts and mortar shrapnel, raining down from above. Its armor was thin, less than 2 inches on the front, barely enough to stop heavy machine gun fire, let alone the high-velocity shell of a German anti-tank gun. Against the German heavy armor rolling toward them, the M10s were effectively made of glass. The German 88mm shells could punch through an M10, exit the back, and still have enough velocity to kill a man standing behind it. When Murphy's supporting armor rolled into position, they weren't parking a fortress. They were parking a coffin. The crews knew it. They were nervous, their engines idling, ready to shoot and scoot. But in the frozen mud of Holtzwihr, there was nowhere to scoot to. The final angle of this tragedy was the geography itself. The Colmar Pocket in this sector was often described by soldiers as a billiard table. It was perfectly, cruelly flat. In Normandy, hedgerows broke up the line of sight. In the Ardennes, dense pine forests offered concealment. In the Alsace plain, if you stood up, you died. There were no ridges, no gullies, no stone walls. Just white snow and grey sky. This meant that the range of engagement was absolute. If you could see the enemy, they could see you. Worse, the ground had conspired against the Americans. Because the soil was frozen solid, digging in was physically impossible. A foxhole provides a soldier with a sense of safety and a place to hide from the horizontal spray of shrapnel. Without foxholes, Murphy's men were on the pavement. They were lying on top of the ice, exposed to every fragment of steel that flew through the air. This terrain dictated the tactics. The Germans didn't need to be fancy. They just needed to suppress the woods with artillery, turning the trees into shrapnel, and then drive their tanks straight across the open field. There were no obstacles to slow them down. So, when the sun rose on January 26th, the tactical equation was complete. A sick lieutenant, a terrified, depleted platoon, 3 thin-skinned vehicles, and a flat, frozen sheet of ice leading directly to the enemy's heavy guns. The board was set for a massacre. January 26th, 1400 hours. The silence of the Riedwehr wood shatters instantly. It begins not with tanks, but with artillery. A barrage of German 88mm and 105mm shells slams into the American position. In the frozen forest, artillery is doubly lethal. The shells hit the canopy, detonating in the treetops. The pines explode, sending deadly splinters of wood raining down like jagged spears alongside the hot steel shrapnel. The men of Company B, lying exposed on the frozen ground, curl into balls, praying for it to stop. Through the smoke and the falling timber, the shapes emerge. Across the white field, 6 heavy German tanks rumble forward in a line abreast. Behind them, moving in a disciplined wedge, are 250 German infantrymen clad in winter-white camouflage. They look like ghosts against the snow. The American M10 Tank Destroyers engage. It is a desperate, short-lived duel. The 90mm gun on the lead M10 barks, but the shell ricochets harmlessly off the sloped armor of the lead German Jagdpanther. The German response is immediate and precise. An 88mm armor-piercing shell screams across the field and punches through the thin steel of the M10 on Murphy's right flank. The vehicle shudders violently. Smoke pours from the hatch. 2 of the crew scramble out, dragging a wounded comrade, but the driver is dead inside. Panic ripples through the American line. The green replacements, seeing their armor support destroyed in seconds, begin to break. They scramble backward, abandoning their positions, terrified by the oncoming wall of steel. The line is disintegrating. Murphy sees the collapse happening in real time. He knows that if these men try to run across the open ground behind them while under fire, they will be cut down like wheat. He grabs the field telephone. His voice cuts through the explosions, not shouting, but flat and hard. "Get back," he orders his platoon sergeant. "Get the men back to the tree line. Regroup at the rally point. I'll cover you." The sergeant hesitates. Leaving the commander behind is unthinkable. But Murphy screams, "Go! That's an order." The platoon retreats, vanishing into the smoke of the woods. Murphy is now the only American soldier left on the forward line. He stands near the burning hulk of the M10, his M1 carbine in one hand, the field telephone handset in the other. The German infantry is now within 200 yards, their machine guns raking the ground around his feet. The tanks are even closer, their tracks churning the bloody snow. Murphy empties his carbine at the advancing Germans. It's a futile gesture. pebbles against a landslide. He looks for a weapon, anything heavier. His eyes land on the burning M10. The crew has fled. The hull is engulfed in flames. Inside, the ammunition is cooking off, popping like firecrackers. It is a 60-ton bomb waiting to explode. But mounted on the turret ring, untouched by the fire, is the M2.50 caliber machine gun. And the belt is full. Murphy drops his empty carbine. He doesn't run away from the fire. He runs toward it. Murphy hauls himself up the glacis plate of the burning destroyer. The heat is intense, singeing his eyebrows and drying the sweat instantly on his face. The vehicle shudders beneath him as 90mm shells inside the hull begin to detonate from the heat. He is standing on top of a volcano. He swings the heavy .50 caliber machine gun toward the enemy. The weapon is cold, but the barrel heats up instantly as he opens fire. The heavy, rhythmic thumping of the gun tears through the winter air, smashing into the line of German infantry. The effect is devastating. The .50 caliber bullet doesn't just wound, it dismembers. The front rank of the German assault dissolves. The Germans are stunned. They cannot see Murphy through the thick black smoke billowing from the M10. To them, the volume of fire suggests a hidden bunker or a fully manned defensive line. They dive for cover in the shallow ditches, their momentum broken. Murphy grabs the field telephone again. The line is still live. He connects with the artillery battalion miles behind the line. "Drop it, 50 over," he shouts. The voice on the other end crackles, that it is close to his position. "Just fire the damn rounds," he replies. Artillery shells begin to rain down on the field. Murphy is conducting a symphony of destruction. With one hand, he traverses the machine gun, spraying bursts at any German helmet that pops up. With the other, he adjusts the artillery fire, walking the barrage closer and closer to the tank destroyer. The ground shakes. Shrapnel pings off the steel hull of the M10 like hail. A squad of German infantry tries to flank him on the right, crawling through a drainage ditch. Murphy spots them. He swings the gun, cutting the grass and the men down in a single long burst. The German tanks, blind in the smoke and separated from their infantry support, begin to hesitate. They can't advance without foot soldiers to clear the woods, and their foot soldiers are being pinned down by what seems to be a phantom army. But the Germans are persistent. A group creeps forward, getting within 10 yards of the burning vehicle. Murphy sees them. He keys the mic on the phone. "Drop it right on me. They're right on top of me." The artillery officer warns him it is danger close. Murphy screams, "I said drop it." The artillery obliterates the ground directly in front of the M10. The concussion nearly knocks Murphy off the turret. The blast wave kills the advancing Germans instantly. Murphy is unscathed, shielded by the very smoke and fire that threatens to kill him. For 1 hour, the duel continues. The German attack falters. The infantry, leaderless and terrified of the ghost in the fire, begins to pull back. The tanks, sensing the shift, throw their gears into reverse. Murphy fires his last belt of ammunition. The gun clicks dry. His leg is bleeding again. The M10 is groaning, the metal twisting from the heat. He tosses the handset down. He doesn't jump. He slides off the back of the burning hull, limping into the snow just as the vehicle's fuel tanks finally surrender to the flames. Murphy does not run. He walks. He limps back toward the tree line, a small, soot-stained figure moving against the backdrop of the inferno he just created. Behind him, the M10 finally succumbs to the catastrophic pressure. The turret blows off in a fountain of sparks and twisted metal, landing in the snow with a hiss. Had he stayed 30 seconds longer, he would have been vaporized. He reached the edge of the woods. His men are there, huddled in the undergrowth, staring at him with a mixture of relief and absolute disbelief. They expect him to collapse. They expect him to call for a medic. He is bleeding from his leg. His hair is singed and he is shaking violently from the malaria fever that has returned with a vengeance. Instead, Murphy looks at his platoon sergeant. He checks the action on his carbine and says, "Reform the line. We're going back out there." It is a moment of pure command presence. Murphy knows the enemy is confused. The Germans believe they have just been repelled by a heavy defensive position. Their infantry is scattered. Their tanks are blind. Momentum has shifted. The remnants of Company B, fewer than 20 men, rise from the snow. Led by their 19-year-old lieutenant, they charge back into the open field. They sweep forward, pushing past the burning wreckage of the tank destroyers. The Germans, disoriented and demoralized by the slaughter of their infantry screen, crumble. The Americans retake the woods. They push all the way to the original line, securing the flank of the 3rd Division. When the smoke clears, the scale of Murphy's one-man stand becomes quantifiable. Scattered across the snow in fan-shaped patterns in front of the M10 are the bodies of German soldiers. The official army report would later credit Murphy with killing or wounding 50 enemy combatants during that single hour. He had stopped a reinforced German company and 6 tanks single-handedly. The report from the field that day was understated, as military reports often are. But the Medal of Honor citation that would eventually be drafted captures the raw reality of the event. It reads, "Lieutenant Murphy's indomitable courage and his refusal to give an inch of ground saved his company from possible encirclement and destruction, and enabled it to hold the woods which had been the enemy's objective. For the men of Company B, however, it wasn't about citations. It was about the simple, terrifying fact that they were alive because the small Texan refused to die." The Battle of Holtzwihr was the nail in the coffin for the German 19th Army. Murphy's stand had done more than just save a few dozen American lives. It had preserved the operational tempo of the entire Allied offensive. Because the Riedwehr Woods were held, the 3rd Division did not have to pause to regroup. They could continue their drive. In the days that followed, the Rock of the Marne Division cracked the German line wide open. They seized the bridgehead at Neuf-Brisach. On February 2nd, the French First Army liberated the city of Colmar itself. By February 9th, the last organized German resistance on the west bank of the Rhine ceased. The Colmar Pocket, the festering wound in the Allied flank, was finally cauterized. For Audie Murphy, the war effectively ended on that burning tank destroyer. Shortly after the action, he was pulled off the line. The army realized that a living Medal of Honor recipient was more valuable as a symbol than as a rifleman. He was promoted to first lieutenant and eventually sent home, adorned with every medal for valor the United States had to give, plus decorations from France and Belgium. But the cost of being the most decorated soldier of World War II was extracted in a currency the public couldn't see. Murphy returned to Texas a hero, paraded through streets, and put on the cover of Life magazine. Hollywood came calling, turning the baby-faced killer into a movie star. He played himself in the film adaptation of his autobiography, To Hell and Back. Yet, The man who walked off the field at Holtzwihr never really left the war. For the rest of his life, Murphy slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. He suffered from debilitating nightmares, insomnia, and what we now recognize as severe post-traumatic stress disorder, then dismissed simply as battle fatigue. The cinematic image of the fearless hero stood in stark contrast to the reality of a man haunted by the faces of the friends he couldn't save and the enemies he had destroyed. In his later years, Murphy was candid about the nature of his heroism. He rejected the label of fearless. He often said that he was terrified every moment he was on the line. His action at Holtzwihr wasn't born out of a desire for glory, but out of a desperate cold logic. If he didn't stay, everyone would die. It was the ultimate act of fraternal love, disguised as violence. The legacy of Holtzwihr is not just a story of one man's bravery. It is a testament to the breaking point of the human spirit and what lies beyond it. Murphy showed that an ordinary man, pushed beyond the limits of endurance, freezing, sick, and terrified, can still make a choice to stand when every instinct screams to run. War is typically a game of numbers: tonnage, caliber, division strength, logistics. Military history is written in the movement of masses, where victory is calculated by the side with the heaviest battalions. But history occasionally pivots not on the movement of armies, but on the stubbornness of a single soul. On January 26th, 1945, the entire weight of the German counter-offensive in the Colmar Pocket crashed against one 19-year-old boy. And the boy didn't move. Audie Murphy's stand at Holtzwihr defies the conventional physics of warfare. It suggests that there is a variable in combat that cannot be quantified by logistics or armor thickness: the sheer, irrational refusal to accept defeat. Murphy did not fight that day because he thought he could win. By his own admission, he expected to die on that burning hull. He fought because the alternative, the slaughter of his men, was unacceptable. There is a tragic irony in his story. The world remembers him as the walking grenade, the ultimate warrior who killed hundreds. But his motivation was never destruction. It was preservation. He became the deadliest man on the battlefield solely to protect the 19 frightened men shivering in the woods behind him. He absorbed the violence of the entire sector so that they wouldn't have to. In the end, the image of the lone figure on the burning tank is more than just a piece of military history. It is a monument to the ultimate burden of command. It reminds us that true heroism is rarely a moment of triumph or glory. It is a moment of absolute loneliness, where a person faces the fire, looks at the impossible odds, and decides to stand anyway.